So individuals who were in opposition to the changes that took place in Christianity as a result of acquiring first an approved status and then eventually within a century an official status. Many of these individuals gathered together in communities of sometimes as few as one or sometimes as many as hundreds, and formed monastic or ascetic groups. So there's that word, asceticism or ascetic, and it's not a familiar word for many of you, so we're going to spend just a moment on it because understanding that word is going to help us understand the text about Amma Syncletica a lot more, and or at least in a more pure and perfect way, and also the text on Saint Theodore for tomorrow. So what is an ascetic? An ascetic is an individual who trains or who is disciplined. And of course you have there an image of an athlete, and athletes train and athletes are disciplined. And in fact, the term emerges originally within athletic culture. So an individual who engages in training, engages in discipline of the body or practice would be someone who is considered an ascetic. And athletes were considered ascetics in Greco-Roman culture. And it was believed that by training the body and controlling not just what you put in the body, but also what comes out of the body, that an athlete might be able to more perfectly hone their skills and achieve victory. And with victory came the honor that accompanied the victory. In fact, the honor was really the primary prize. So in the classical world and antiquity, much of this training and discipline is tied to things of the body. And so for athletes, there was careful control over, as I said, what went into the body, but also what went out. It was believed among male athletes that to lose sperm would be to lose something of an individual's life force and something of their strength. So in fact, the desire to refrain from sexual activity for athletes was certainly something that was promoted. And you can see it taken to its extreme in a quote that I'm going to show you here just in a minute, after we look at this marvelous image of Roman mosaic of women participating in games. I have to confess, I forgot this image was coming up, but it's just one of my favorites for a couple of reasons. First of all, you see some of the different kinds of games and activities that Roman women took place in and enjoyed. This woman, it looks up here like she's got weights. Here we've got some medicine balls. Here we have some women running. I have no idea what this is. This woman has obviously won some kind of victory, but there's other things I love about it, because I love when when people criticize some of the outfits that female athletes wear now as being too sexy. I simply point them to this image as a way of saying, look, even in antiquity, people recognized that in order to participate in an athletic activity in a free way, your body needs to be unconstrained. And so whenever my parents watch the Olympics and the Summer Olympics, and my mother gets all fussy about, oh, the women are dressed so sexy, I just pull out this picture and say, hey, Mom, look at these Roman women 2,000 years ago running around in bikinis with medicine balls. She doesn't appreciate that. Anyway, so in this very provocative quote here, this particular individual is writing about an athlete who dreamed he cut off his genitals bound his head, and was crowned as a victor. As long as he remained a virgin, his athletic career was brilliant and distinguished. But once he began to have sexual intercourse, he ended his career ingloriously. Now, this is probably for some of you one of those moments when you're really happy we're not sitting together in a classroom, because a quote like this might make you uncomfortable. So a few things. First of all, I am sorry if you're uncomfortable, but this is precisely the type of text that we need to be reading when we're thinking about views of the body and how the Christian religion would construct theologies of care around people. So what we want to think about here is that this individual believes that the removal of their genitals will assist them in having a career that is brilliant and distinguished, and that sexual intercourse is going to make everything end ingloriously. So these are important texts for thinking about how people are going to view the body and what the body does. And this is a different type of approach from a very positive view of the body and a positive view of sexual behavior. So this is just one of those kinds of texts we need to sometimes engage with. So there are other elements of Greek and Roman culture that Christianity is going to inherit. From the field of philosophy, we will learn things like this. Epictetus writes, "It is a mark of an ungifted man to spend a great deal of time in what concerns his body. Much exercise, much eating, much drinking, much evacuating of the bowels, much copulating. These are to be done in passing. Let your whole attention be devoted to the mind." So here we get clearly that the gifted man, okay, regards the body, regards exercise, eating, drinking, going to the bathroom, and sexual activity as things that you are to spend very little attention on. So there are other elements of Greco-Roman culture that will lend to the ascetic inheritance of Christianity. Within Judaism, which is really distinct from Greco-Roman culture, but yet still part of that world, you will have a group known as the Essenes, and these are an ascetic group that live apart from Jerusalem. And the cousin of Jesus, John the Baptist, is reputed to have been an Essene. The Essenes were a group, they were very monastic-like in their living and in their eating and in their dressing. They wore specific garments, they had a restricted diet. And so if John the Baptist was an Essene, and if John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin, we can assume or guess or suspect that there might have been some Essene influence on the person of Jesus. And in fact, we do see some of that. In the Gospel according to Matthew, we read that Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. So what's interesting in this, just these two sentences, is that Jesus withdraws to the wilderness. Okay, first of all, he retreats to a place of solitude, but that place of solitude is a place in where something that is unpleasant resides, even nefarious. We learn also that he fasted. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he ate or drank nothing, because it would be hard to survive those conditions. But a fast is a restricted diet. So he engaged in a restricted diet for 40 days and 40 nights, and, god darn it, he was hungry, right? So that's a pretty human experience. Other ascetic inheritances for Christianity come through the writings of Paul, who writes, for example, in 1 Corinthians, "I chastise my body and bring it into subjection, lest perhaps when I have preached to others, I myself should be cast away. So practice what you preach, Paul is saying. If you are preaching an ascetic activity, then it is only by virtue of the fact that you are practicing that. You find the ascetic inheritance of Christianity also in apocryphal texts, texts that are not part of the canon. For example, in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, in a passage that is very similar to the Gospel Beatitudes, one reads, "Blessed are those who keep the flesh pure, for they shall become the temple of God. Blessed are those who remain continent," and that means chaste, "for to them shall God speak. Blessed are those who have wives, as if they had them not, for they shall inherit God. Blessed are the bodies of virgins, for they shall be well-pleasing and shall not lose the reward of their purity." As well, in the martyr passages, martyr texts, we find this also, this ascetic inheritance. Immediately after birth pains came upon her, we read in the martyrdom of Saint Perpetua and Felicitas, she suffered a good deal because of the natural difficulty of an 8-month delivery. One of the guards said, "You suffer so much now. What will you do when you are tossed to beasts?" Little did you think of them when you refused to sacrifice. There's that sacrifice that you read about earlier. "What I'm suffering now," she replied, "I suffer by myself, but then another will be inside me who will suffer for me as I suffer for him." So some of the monastic models that are going to emerge among early practitioners of Christian asceticism are going to be, for the most part, hermits, individuals who live on their own. And Amos Encletica is a hermit. And of course, we know there are hermit crabs, little individual creatures that carry their shells with them and live fairly solitary lives. And that's what a hermit is. As well, there are Cenobitic ascetic figures, monastic figures, and they live together in community. So Eremitic, someone who lives independent, and Cenobitic, someone who lives in community. And then there are also spiritual marriages, and spiritual marriages are a particularly interesting monastic model wherein an individual will marry another person, but they will live a celibate life. And usually at this point in the classroom, people start teetering and snickering and wanting to know why somebody would marry and not have sex. And the answer is simple. Not everyone wants to be married. Not everybody wants to have sex. And yet, in a Roman world where there are extreme pressures on people for marriage to perpetuate family lines, this is something that is expected of you. And so spiritual marriage provides an opportunity for a contradictory mode of life or behavior. Okay? Actually, all of these do, whether one is a hermit or a cenobite or as part of a spiritual marriage. The ascetic life, the monastic life, provides an opportunity for you to alter the world into which you are born, and you alter that world through your physical practices. Now, many early ascetic figures settled in the deserts of Nitria. Here's Alexandria. And here we have the Nile, and you can see the remains of some of these early Cenobitic communities where individuals lived. And notice they're not very far from each other, right? So you can see that even though a monastic figure might be living a solitary life, if they're living in community, they're living together. And here we have a large monastic Cenobitic community, Marsaba, which is still an active monastery to this day. So it's probably a good time to turn to the selection on the life and activity of the Holy and Blessed Teacher Syncletica. Your questions that I'm asking you to consider are also on your Google Doc to contextualize, to analyze, and to evaluate. What about Christian theology or culture does the author assume that you know? Why does she not wish for a cure from her malady? And what does disease enable her to do? And how does illness create a sickness role? Feel free to answer those questions, and if you have any additional questions, you know what to do. icenblplu.edu.